and welcome everybody to this beautiful morning. I hope you're all a little bit awake. I hope the community event yesterday was awesome. Was it? Yeah. Good. So, time for a follow-along session. Who here has done a follow-along session last year also? Or to this year already? Okay, so we'll be doing a lot of demos. I've got like 4 or 5 slides, and all this other stuff will just be demoing. So I've sacrificed a lot of stuff to the demo gods. Hopefully it's going well. And you can follow along. There will be resources available for you. So if you don't have your laptop out yet and you want to follow along, now is the time. We're going to talk about Azure Functions in combination with API management. First, of course, thank you to all the sponsors who help make this wonderful event possible. Can I have a quick applause for the sponsors? So, I'll be your host for the next 1.5 hours or a bit more. I'm Leo Visser. I'm from the Netherlands, and I work at OGD. We're a company who does a lot of stuff, everything from consultancy to outsourcing to software development. And I've been in many of the different areas of the company. And nowadays I'm working as a consultant. I'm working mostly as a consultant for cloud technologies. I also have a blog, autosysops.com. A lot of the things we're going to do today you can also find on my blog. It should be there already, or it will be there in the next couple of months. And you can find me on the socials if you want to follow me. I'm also an Azure MVP. So I should be able to tell you some things about Azure. And it's time to get ready. If you have your own Azure environment and you want to follow along with this session in your own environment so you can keep the resources and keep the demo environment, you can. I will show everything you need. If you don't have an Azure environment or you don't have the credits, you can use this QR code. It will bring you to the GitHub repo from PSConfEU, where in the follow along folder, there is a folder about API management, Power API, of Power APIM. And in there, you will find a script. I saw some people already trying to run the script, so I have to give a small caveat. There was a bug in the script, and I was trying to fix this bug. And while fixing this bug, I introduced a new bug, which I didn't notice anymore. So you can run this script, and it will set up a whole environment for you, but it will ask for your name, and the name needs to be at least like 15 characters long. So you can just enter a name and add some gibberish behind it, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It can be as long as you want. It will cut it off. I didn't notice this until just this morning when we were testing it. And I thought, let's not try to fix it now, because then probably other things will break even worse. So you can either clone this repository or you can just copy it all, save it somewhere. So here I also have the script. And I'm just going to, along with you, run it. It should, oh, we're not in the right folder yet. We should be in follow along.
Could harm my device.
Sorry?
Said it could harm my device.
Yeah, if you download scripts, it will always say it could harm the device. You have to unlock it. So if you're running it, it asks for your name. I can, for example, say Leo Visser, awesome. You can, if you don't like your name to be in my environment, everything will be deleted afterwards, but you can enter whatever. It doesn't have to be your specific name, just a name so you can find the resources. For the email, it needs to be a valid email address. It doesn't need to be a working email address. For one of the resources we have to deploy, a email address needs to be entered, and it's checking that it's a valid email address. But test@test.com also works. So it will give you a username and it will give you a password, and you can log into Azure in a moment and your resources will be there. We're doing this now first because the deployment of these resources takes a little while. So while it's deploying, I can tell you a bit more. For the people who want to follow along in their own environment, what we're setting up now is I see some people are already deploying stuff. So it will first create a resource group just to make sure that the resources are all put in one specific place and I can manage it easily. A user account will be created for you, and the user account will get owner rights on the resource group. So please, to everybody here who is using this, you now have a owner account in a resource group in my subscription. Please don't use this to spin up like a fun crypto miner VM or whatever and waste all my credits. I trust you a little bit that you don't misuse this, and else everybody is screwed. So just some basic resources are generated. If you go to the repository, there's also a README, and in the README it also gives a lot of information. So the things which are generated now are the resource group, an API management instance, which uses the basic v2 SKU, a consumption tier function app, or which using the PowerShell core 7.4 in a Windows environment. And it's deploying a key vault. Most of the stuff is all deployed with default settings. We're going to change the settings afterwards so you can see what's happening. So if you're going along in your own environment, you can create these resources already. Especially the API management can take a short while to deploy. Luckily, recently the v2 API management has been released to everybody. Because in the past, if we wanted to do this workshop, we now all had to wait about half an hour before we could start, before everything was deployed, and maybe even longer. And now with this one, I think in 5 or 10 minutes we should be okay. So before I continue, let's go on with a few small rules during this session. If none of you ask any questions, we'll probably be done quite early. So if you have any questions, please ask them. You can just ask them whenever, because we will be continuing and building on top of things we built already. So if you don't understand anything, please ask it so we can all follow along. And you're not just sitting here looking like, well, that's nice, and no idea what's happening. Just a quick question also. Who here has never worked with Azure before? Good. I always assume everybody does, but a while ago I was giving a workshop about this, and then half of the room had only worked with AWS, which made my life a lot more difficult. Great. So, yes, I'm going to talk a lot more about API management for the next 1.5 hours. Yes, I'm going to do that now. Because before I'm going to talk about API management, a little bit about Azure Functions, and then I'm going to API management. So if you still have questions after it. Do you all know what an Azure function is? Okay, so an Azure function is a serverless way to run some code. So Well, when we started with running code and so on, first we all just had our machines and we run the code on machines. Eventually, we maybe could do it in like a container or in other techniques, but there's also a way to do it serverless. Many cloud providers offer these options. In AWS, for example, it will be Lambda, and in Azure, it's called Functions. It means that they just provide you with an environment where you can enter your code and all the backend stuff is managed for you. You just say, I want to run PowerShell code. It needs to run on this framework type, like PowerShell Core 7.4. And you can write your code, and Microsoft manages that there is some kind of machine where it's running on. You don't have to care about this. This is what an Azure function is. And it's great because as developers or as admins or IT pros, we don't have to worry about updating this machine and stuff. If you need to automate something, you can just put your code there and it's okay. And you don't have to worry about all the maintaining of the environment. You do need to, of course, care about like stuff like authentication, identities, and things like this. Azure made this a lot easier with managed identities, which we're going to look at a little bit later also. So, when we're using an Azure function, we can call this Azure function in many different ways. We can schedule it. We can have it trigger on certain alerts or on other things. We can also just call it by a URL. So, a way to use this is that I can set up some automation scripts. For example, a script to restart a virtual machine. Something which maybe a service desk person or an IT pro needs to do. And I can just create a small function which says restart a virtual machine. And I send the name of the virtual machine and it can restart it. I can create this function and I give it parameters and it can run. And I can enter the parameters either by adding it in the URL or in a body. And it works. But because we're running in the cloud, if I just do this, I have a URL. And if anybody else has this URL, they can also run this script. And if this would be an URL like you just used to set up a whole environment, maybe some of you looked at the code, which you just run. I hope you did, and you just didn't run code without looking at it on your machine. Probably you did, but be aware of it. You will also see that there's a URL in there. Actually, it's not a URL for Azure Function because I was lazy. I was using a Logic app because I'm kind of a fake developer, but it could well have been also a function app. And with this URL, you can always do this. This is why this Logic app will be disabled after this talk. So you can't generate more environments in my environment. Would be nice for you, not nice for me. So I need to keep this URL very, very hidden, which is hard. So this is where we want to add things like authentication and security to my function. And I can do this in PowerShell. I could create in my PowerShell function stuff to add authentication. If I want to do it, I could do it in the Azure function. The Azure function has some options for this. But many times we see that developers are like, I write code. I know how to do this in code. So let's just add it in code. Let's send people along some API key or whatever, and I will test it in my script. Which works, which is good. But it makes developing these tools a lot harder for us. Because now every time I want to ask somebody in my company, at a customer, to write an automation, they have to think about all these things. They have to think about making sure that the authentication, that the security, all is in order. And every time we need to audit this, we need to check it. And a lot of times we're also reusing code. We could do this with modules and edit in a module and use this module and also make it a lot more complex this way. And we need to maintain these modules good, make sure that we don't introduce breaking bugs to these modules where some of our functions may crash. So this is, oh yeah, I had a nice animation where this security will reject some things, but not everything. This is where at one point I was like, why don't we use API management for this? Because the company I was working for and many customers I was working for also had this issue. They had nice automations, either in Logic App, in Azure Functions, in different ways. It doesn't matter. They were calling this by URL endpoints. And API management, what it is it's a nice layer where I can gather many different endpoints, many different automations, and I can collect them all in one resource where I can structure a nice API structure. Yeah. Where I can give them all nice names and make sure that I set the parameters in a standardized way. And with this API management, I can also add policies. And these policies I can use to shift left things to. So what we're going to do during this follow-along session is we're going to add certain policies to this API management. And we're going to see how this works and how useful this tool is. So, let's see if some of our demos, or let's see if our environment has already been deployed. I'm just going to do this also in the other environment. Nothing can go wrong, right? So, if you haven't done it yet, you can go to portal.office.com. And you've got a user account and you've got a password. For people who are watching back on the recording, this username and password should be gone already. Sadly, as much as I tried, I couldn't get rid of all the MFA requirements, I think. No, because Microsoft is very good with their security, so they didn't allow me to.
And that's nice.
I mean, I don't mind that you see my phone number. My phone number is publicly available anyway, so if you have the problem that you can't get a code, ask some of your neighbors, or else you could use mine. But then, yeah, we need to switch it, and I need to add a new password. So I'm going to be very lazy. We don't need this all. So this is my new password generator. And let's sign in. So, I believe many of you probably did this already. We nowadays also get a very nice introduction. And if you go to resource groups, there should be a resource group here. And if everything went well, you should see more than this. So, of course, we had an error again. I created this name already, so this is why it's not working. I was testing before, and this name was soft deleted. So probably for you all, it worked. So I will create another one in a second. Or let's start it now. So in the meantime, while this is deploying, we can see that one of the resources which was created is a Azure Function app. I'm also just going to refer a little bit to the document we have here. We've now done step 1, creating the environment. And we're going to start on step 2, the Hello World. By the way, was your question answered about the API management? Do you have a small idea now about what it does? Yeah. Okay, and we'll see the rest in a moment. So the Azure Function, like I said, it's a serverless way to deploy resources. I'm going to quickly open Azure again and see if in the new one already my function is deployed, so I can use this one. So you can all see my phone number again. It is interesting though. I'm not sure if this is in every country, but at least in the Netherlands, in the past we had like the phone book. And to get your phone number entered in the phone book, you had to pay to make sure it was listed for companies and for people and so on. And many people paid to get their phone number added in the phone book, so you could be looked up. And nowadays you need to pay to make sure that your data isn't added. And maybe the people who are making a YouTube video can blur out the phone number, but if they don't, it's not a problem. It's not like I'm not getting any spam calls anyways. So we generated a nice password already, yes. And got it. So just to see who here is all using the resources in my environment now. If you can raise your hands, just so I know a little bit. And other people are doing it in their own environment or they're just watching. Okay. So if things went well, we should have a application insight, an API management server, a function app, a app service plan, a key vault, and a storage account. This is a lot more than I just said you should create. This is because the storage account and the app insight were created while we deployed the API management, and the app service plan was deployed when we created the Azure Function app. Now I will try to zoom in as much as possible all the time, but especially the interface for API management doesn't always scale very well, and it will tend to hide things if you zoomed in too much. So maybe sometimes I can't zoom in too much. If you can't see it at any point, please just shout zoom it, and I will zoom in for a moment so you can all see, and then we can zoom out again if needed. So let's just start with creating a small function app, or Azure Function. If you've never done this, it's actually quite easy. I've created this function app, and in this function app, I can create a function. Create a function. And there's several different templates based on how I want this function to be triggered. I'm going for an HTTP trigger, which means if a call is sent to a URL, it will run. I could give it a name if I want to. And there's an authorization level. Now, during this follow-along session, I won't be using the best practices for security. Because if we would do this right, we would use the premium tiers of these resources, which have the option to connect to virtual networks. And we could keep it internally and make sure that things are routed internally in the networks. I don't have the resources to give you all premium resources, so you're just getting the basic resources. So we'll be using public endpoints. So things will be communicating over the internet with each other. If you want to do it right, you should probably also add some kind of authorization level to your function. But this makes the API management more complex, and I try to cut out as much as possible to make it as clear as possible. So for this demo, I'm just going to use an anonymous authorization level, which means that you can just enter this URL and it will work. Things like function and admin, they will create some kind of API key, which you have to send along to actually have the function work. So if somebody only has your URL, it still wouldn't work. They also need to have this function or this API key. Let's create this. And it is actually nice. They give you some code already. But I've also entered some code here myself. And we're just going to copy this code, paste it here. And like I said already, the scaling in many of these things is not the best. So let's zoom out one more. So what does the code do? It's just PowerShell code, so we have some parameters. These are default parameters, request and trigger metadata. You can set the names of these parameters. They are set by default. In the documentation, you can find the default names of it. I will show you in a second where you can find them. And we're getting the query name. The query is attributes I'm sending along in the URL. During the keynote, this one was shown by Barbara and Rob. I always know his name, but sorry. It's the no coalescing. So if no name is provided, it will give world. And if anything is provided, it will use the name which is provided. I thought this is a nice place to use it, to show you all how you can actually use it in practice. And then it just generates an output. So for the people who hasn't noticed yet, we're sending some kind of name to the function, and it says hello and then the name. And if no name is provided, it's hello world. We can click save. And I can get the function URL. I can copy this. I could start a PowerShell instance. And I can say invoke REST method. This is not the URL I want to do now. And we could just run this. And it says hello world. I can also say name is. Who wants to be said hello? Well, let's do Jelle. He's sitting here, my colleague. He will be doing a talk after lunch today. And now it's hello Jelle. So this code is actually now running in Azure. We're sending a request to the code. It's processing it and it's sending the response back. Nice. We've got our first thing running. But like I said, if you have this URL, everybody could do it. If I forget to remove these resources, people who later watching at home can still try this URL and it would work. I hope I don't forget. Now, I also said I would say a little bit. Here you can see, in the integration, you can see the trigger. And if you click it, here you can actually give the name of the parameter. So the name of the variable which it's using. I can also say which methods are accepted. So I can, for example, say get and post and some other ones. For our demo, only get would be enough. But because I'm lazy, I'm keeping get and post both enabled. This is our Azure function. So we're here and we did a test and it seems to be working. Now let's start setting up an API management. So I'm using the version 2 of API management. And I'm not sure if it's a bug or not. I haven't been able to contact the product group about it yet. By the way, I'm getting very annoyed by something already. Have you all also noticed that lately Azure is tending to do this? If you don't know how to fix it, you can go to Settings, Appearance and Startup Views, the Surface menu behavior, and you can click it on Expanded and click Apply. And now if we go back, all our menus are expanded instantly. So normally what I could do is I could go in the menu and I could go to API management, select my API management and create a new thing. I'm not sure if it's a bug in V2 or whatever, but I couldn't get this to work yesterday, so we're just going to do it manually. I think this has something to do with the V2 not supporting backends yet. Backends is a thing in API management, and from the documentation it says it's not supporting it. So I think this is why it's not working, but there's no error message at all in the portal. So if you're doing this, this might be the reason why it's not working. So we're just going to do it manually. So we go to the API management and we're going to APIs. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create an API. The API is a collection of operations. So in an API management, I can have multiple different APIs. First time I was setting up this workshop, my goal was to also use workspaces and actually create one API management instance where everybody of you could work in. And by using workspaces, give you only one API you could work at. But V2 is not supporting workspaces yet. And the reason I can't use V1 is because deployment takes about half an hour for one instance. So we would be still waiting for the deployments to finish now. So this is why we all have our own instance now. But you can create a lot of APIs in here. There is a limit. I haven't been able to reach the limit yet in implementations where we use this. But for sure, somebody will reach these limits at one point. So normally you could create a function app one. But also, I think due to the backends not working properly yet in V2, this doesn't seem to work. So we're just going to make a default HTTP trigger. And I can give it a name. Well, let's call it PSConfEU. I can also give it an API URL suffix. You can see if I would add something here. In the base URL, it will be added after it. So if I want to create multiple different APIs in this one API instance, I can add an API URL suffix and they will be grouped this way. And I can have different things in this same instance. Like I said already, I'm lazy. I don't like typing that much. So I'm only going to create one. So I'm keeping it empty. Question?
Is that the same as an endpoint?
Yeah, we're going to create some kind of endpoints now. So in the end, the operations we're going to create will be the endpoints, but this will be part of the URL. And it's like a grouping of different endpoints. So let's create this one. And again, Microsoft is very good with the security. Very happy about this. We're going to disable it. So we can go to settings, and there's something called subscription required. And this is kind of the same as with the Azure function. It's a key I can set up, and every time I do the request, I have to send along this key. Which is good, which you should use if you're using this in a production environment, because we're going to do a lot of testing, and we're probably going to forget to send along this key sometimes and get stuck on why it's not working. We're just going to disable this for now because we're developing. If you're just developing a solution, you can quite often just disable this, and only when you're starting to get ready for production, enable it and see if everything still works. Makes your life easier.
So subscription is kind of an API.
Yeah, subscription is an API key.
Can you source it from somewhere else?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you can have it in a database?
Here with subscriptions, you will see that there are some, and you can programmatically add them, renew them, and so on. And we're also going to create our own API key in a moment. So we're going to use API management to create our own API key stored in a key vault. So let's add an operation. Let's call this one hello world. I can give it a URL. Let's see what URL I set to enter here. Let's just call it hello. Oh yeah, let's call the whole thing hello because the world is not always there. So I can create an operation. I give it a name. I give it a URL. And we click save. And now here we have this beautiful view. I must say, the first time I was using API management, I was quite disappointed. I created this and now I saw some nice styles and I was kind of lost. Like, what do I do now? Getting used to this view for me took a little while, but eventually you find out that there's a lot of places where you can actually click and it gives you a lot of options. So the first one we're going to do is we're going to go to the HTTPS endpoints. And here we're going to override it and enter the URL from our function. And we can click save. And now here is where the magic happens. I've added this here. But you also see now that something was added here in the policies. This wasn't there before. The policies is really where it's happening. This piece of XML code, it's the whole configuration for API management. It's what we're doing in GUI eventually ends up here. And here we see that a backend service base URL was set to this URL. Now I could try to test this. I could give it a parameter, for example, name, and I say Leo, and we could test this and probably it would fail. It says 404 not found. I was making this demo again and I was like, why is it not working? I entered the URL. It should work now, right? It's not working because API management will send along everything it gets in the request just to my endpoint. So it's also sending along any data in the URL. So we can see here in the top already, it's now sending this URL. It's sending it to it's not this one. Sorry, we can't see it here. Oh, no, we can't see it here due to the trace not working. But it's taking this hello part and it's also adding it to the URL we just defined. So we're sending it to the trigger and we're adding /hello to it. This is why it's not working. So normally, if you want to troubleshoot, you could enable trace and you could use the trace option in API management and it will show all the different steps which it's doing. Again, because I'm using V2, trace is not working. I was hoping to give you an option without V2 so we could see these things working. But sadly, I couldn't do this. So we can't use the trace, but if you're ever troubleshooting API management, you can use the trace and it will show all the different steps it's doing. It's a very nice way to test it. So what we also need to do is we need to add a rewrite URI thing. I could copy it from here. I can also show you that there's actually a lot of built-in policies. And one of the policies is the rewrite URI policy. And here I can say, well, this is what we're getting in and rewrite it to, and I keep it empty because after my trigger, nothing should be added. So we can look at the code again. And personally, it shouldn't make a difference as far as I know, but I just like this to be on top for my sake of mind, because this feels like I'm sending it to the URL. I'm not doing it. I'm just setting some settings and then afterwards it's doing it all together. So now if we would test it here and we don't send anything, we get hello world. And if we add a query parameter, we get hello Leo. And of course, here I've got the request URL. So also in PowerShell, I can now do the invoke REST method. And I'm also getting it back. So now I'm not talking to the Azure function anymore. I'm talking to the API management. We see that we're sending it now to just /hello and we give the name. So we've put this API management in between. So normally, if I'm doing this in a production environment, I would want to make sure that the public endpoint for my Azure function now is disabled and it's only using Azure Virtual Networks. So I can't access it from outside and only the API management is accessible from the outside, preferably with something like a web application firewall or something still in between if you want to make it production worthy. We're not going to do this because it would take a lot of time and a lot of money to do it for everybody. So this is the easy part, setting up a hello world. And we've done this. Now, step 3, frag it. When I started working with API management, it was quite a while ago, I got very annoyed because a lot of the times I had to copy and paste a lot of the policy stuff to all the different policies I was setting up. Eventually, they added something which is called policy fragments. And I love them because this piece of code we just created, this rewrite URI and this set backend service URL, we are probably going to do this for every operation which is using this Azure function. And we're going to create multiple different operations for this Azure function. So I'm going to copy this piece of code. And I'm going to go to policy fragments. I'm going to create a new policy fragment. And here in between the fragments, I'm going to paste the code I just created. Make sure the indenting is right. It shouldn't matter, but we all love our indenting. And I can give it a name. Now I said here to give it a specific name, call function. You can give it any name you want, but some of the code snippets I will provide along the way, they assume that you use this name. So I would suggest, if you're following along, to use the call function name. And I can create it. And now I've got a policy fragment, which is called call function. I can go back to my API. I can edit this. I can delete this code, which we made. And I can replace it with include fragment and the name of the fragment we just created. And I can save it. And now this piece of code which we stored somewhere else will be added in our policy definition. So if we're testing it again, it should still work. And now in every operation we're going to make, we could use this same piece of code. So it's less typing, less reuse of code. It's kind of the same like making a PowerShell function. It doesn't have options for parameters, so I can't make like a policy, a policy fragment with specific parameters where I say, well, do it for this or for this, but it does allow the use of variables. So I could use a specific variable in my fragment, And I could set this variable beforehand, and then this way have it act differently depending on what the variable is set to. So I could, for example, in the variable name set the name of my Azure function or the name of the or the backend URL or stuff like this, and then I could reuse it even more. At the moment, nesting of policy fragments is not supported. Not sure if they will support it eventually. I would assume they will, because it would be useful, but at the moment, nesting is not supported. So keep this in mind. Now, let's start to use the power of API management. We've set up this basic structure. Yes?
So what did you do? What exactly did the policy fragment do in this case?
The policy fragment, I added the code which we originally made to rewrite the URL and to set the backend. And we added this to the policy fragment. So now I can easily add this to any policy I'm making. So what I want to do now is I want to have this Azure function. But before somebody is calling the Azure function, I want to check if they given me a specific value or a key. And I'm going to check this with a key vault. Anyone here doesn't know what a key vault is? Good. Maybe somebody in the back can close the door, by the way. I'm hearing quite some noise from the room. So I think that's all the slides I have, yeah. So next slide will be the end of the presentation. Not yet. I think now the interesting part will start. Sorry we had to set it all up, but I hope from now on we will go into the more interesting stuff. So you entered at the right moment. Yes, so we're going to set this up. But first, we need to set up some permissions. Because if I would go to my key vault just now, and I would say, well, let's generate a secret. It says, you can't create a secret. And it just says, error occurred. It doesn't give you any reason why the error occurred. If somebody from the team of Key Vault is watching, please just say that we need to set permissions in this error. So let's add ourselves. So I'm just going to make myself a, I think I said it in here which role we want to give. We want to give ourselves the Key Vault Secrets Officer. And for the members, I'm going to select myself. And now you can find a lot of people here, I believe. So you would need to look for yourself. I think I called myself like blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to add these role assignments. So again, I've given you all owner permissions so you can do this. Please don't abuse it. And also, our API management wants to connect to this Key Vault too. So also our API management needs permissions. So there is something in Azure which is called managed identities. And I'm just going to quickly show you. Managed identities. When we deployed it, the managed identity was set to on. If you're doing this in your own environment, maybe it's still on off. You can set it on and save it. What this does is it will create a managed identity, which means it's a kind of service accounts, if you're more in the on-premise environment, it's kind of like the group managed service accounts, which you have on-premise. You don't have to worry about the username or a password or whatever. It's an identity. I saw the shirt already, that's why I said it. You don't have to worry about the username or a secret or whatever. Azure is managing this. You can just say now, this API management service, it has some kind of identity, and I can assign permissions to it. So we want to give this one the key vault secret user. Although I'm showing you a lot of not best practices, I do try to at least show you the principle of least privileges. And with members, we can select managed identities, select the member. We can say it's an API management and we only have one. And now if we add this, it will be managed by Azure. We don't have to worry about any storing of secrets or certificates or whatever. The introduction of these managed identities was so nice when it was introduced. It took a while for it to be deployed everywhere, but once it was, this made our lives so much easier as Azure developers. Indeed. So, we've set up the permissions. We can go back to our API management. I think so. Oh, we're going to create a secret first. Excuse me. So, now I can create a secret. There's many different ways of doing this. The thing I'm going to do, it's a situation I had with a customer at one point. They had some kind of situation where they had teams and they wanted to send along the name of the team, and the team had certain permissions. So they gave all the teams, I hope everybody is all right over there. They gave all the teams a specific API key, and they built an API management. And with the help of the key vault, we, for example, they had something like start the environment. And depending on the name of the key and the value in the key, different environments were started. So we're going to do kind of the same like this. So we're just going to do it with our hello world. So the name of the key will be the name which we're allowed to say hello to. So in this case, I'm going to, for example, name my secret Leo. And I'm going to give it a secret value. This value will be very secret. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in my case. Let's try this again.
I think I know what I think you used the certificate vault officer instead of the secret vault.
Oh, did I click the wrong one? That would be the thing. Yeah, I did the certificate officer, not the secret officer. Yeah. I was about to check the permissions because it should be a permission issue. Again, if you're watching, people from the API man or from the key vault team, please. So, key vault secrets officer. Let's try this again. I should delete the other permissions, but hey, it's a demo environment. So the reason why I first did a hard refresh is sometimes the token is not refreshed and so on. So sometimes if you're working in Azure and things are not working due to permissions, hard refresh might solve the issue. If not, you probably did something else wrong. Let's try this again. And now it's created. And apparently I'm not allowed to see them, but I am allowed to create them. So let's hope it's there. And we will find out eventually. So, Now, let's create another operation. We call it check key vault. It's this time of year again, where Azure decides that when you're doing a demonstration, it's time to throw out all kinds of errors.
The Wi-Fi here is really bad.
Could be, but I must say I've been working with API management also on Wi-Fi in trains and so on. The issue is probably more that maybe too many people are now from the same IP address doing it, and it's throttling something. Maybe this is the reason.
Actually do that.
No, I can also switch here. Let's switch to the speaker Wi-Fi. Let's see if this changes it. I'm also not sure if it's like the IP address or it's because we're all in this tenant and we're all doing the same things in the tenant. I've got backup options. I've got an environment where it's all set up and we probably should be able to at least look at it, but
the recommendation is to use V2 now, or will you still stick with the other ones, the old one?
my original plan was to use the consumption tier,
Yeah, okay.
but I can only deploy 20 consumption tier API management instances in one subscription, and then it says no more. And it's not a quota, it's a hard limit. There might be a way to go around it, but you really have to ask Microsoft very nicely. And I don't think, for the sake of giving a demo,
But for production, then you would actually use
for
the old ones, not V2.
for production, V2 is still in preview, so wouldn't suggest using it yet. I would suggest looking at it, and if you're just developing things, check if you can use it. It seems to be working again. I'm now on a very flaky Wi-Fi, so maybe the Wi-Fi cuts out at one point, but then we can switch back again. So I'm going to create an operation called check key vault. And I think I just provided some code here. So we can look at this code already while waiting for API management to go along. So we're going to create another... we first wanted to call a policy, and it was hello restricted. I will change it afterwards. So we want to create this policy fragment. Let's go to the policy fragments. Create check key vault.
And then they use XML.
I want to answer this question, but I'm not sure if I can answer this question. I haven't looked it up. So what we're going to do here... Sorry? Yeah. About this piece of code. We have a first part, which is called send request. And with send request, we are sending something to our key vault. You also see it says here your key vault name. So we need to make sure that we take the name of our key vault and replace it here. And what this does, it will send a request to the key vault. And here it's using an expression where it's saying take the query name, and if no name is provided, take world as a default, just so something is provided. And we're going to check if the secret exists. So we're going to check the secret, which is called the name we provided. If it exists, it would work. If it doesn't, we have a condition here which checks if this contains the key value. So the response body, if a value is provided. If not, we will send back a 401, an unauthorized code. If it does exist, we check also if in the headers, a header named key is provided, and if the values are the same. So when we're going to do this call, we're going to send along a header named key, and we're going to enter the secret here, and we're going to check if this secret is the same as the secret in the key vault. If it is, we're going to call our function. If it's not, we're going to send along a 401 again. So this way, I've kind of created my own API key, which I can manage from a key vault. So let's create this. It is really starting to go very slow.
So Fragment is a policy, just like on Netscape, you have a policy
Yeah,
to a request.
Yeah, we created the fragment before, and it's just like a piece of code I can just include everywhere. So while this is going, I've got a version here which is completely set up. So we can have the hello restricted, and in there I can now set the check key vault and the call function. So the call function we created before. And this one seems to be created. Let's see if we can get it to work. Based on the fact that the other one is going fast, it might just be some weird things. Well, let's just go on to this one. So my URL changed a little bit now. It's now called a little bit different, but I can test this. I can add the query parameter. I can add the query parameter name, give the value just like we did before. I can send it, and we're getting back a 401 because we need to present our key. So we had exactly the same, but now it's not accepting it anymore. Now in the headers, we need to add a key, and I need to add the value. If I send this along, it's now taking a little while because this function has to warm up. It says, hello, Leo. If the key would be wrong, it's again a 401 unauthorized. I can do the same in PowerShell. So the name we send along here, we can say headers, key is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, missing an at indeed. And it's working. So that's this step. Now, is it coming up again? You know that things always go back. So in this one, I already did it, but we created, for example, this call function policy. And here we have a name of a specific function. And also in the key vault, we have the name of the key vault hard-coded in our policy fragments. Now, if I would want to reuse these policy fragments even more, maybe also in different API management situations, what I can do is I'm just going to show it here because here's already set up. I can create named functions. or named values. I can give them a name, a display name, and a value. So I've created two. I've created the function name, and I've created key vault name. And now in my policy fragments, I've replaced it with double square brackets and then the name of this thing. So now this policy fragment will just take this named value and use it. So if I would set up a different API management, which might need to connect with a different function, I just only have to change this named value. And I can just reuse the same policy fragments again. So I can manage these policy fragments somewhere in a repo or whatever. I could even, while making a CI/CD pipeline, take these policy fragments from my repo and add them in my CI/CD pipeline, if you want to make it fancy. Making the bicep templates to do this is a challenge, but it is possible. And this way, it's using named values, which is nice. This way we can make it more generalized again. Okay. So, on to the difficult parts. Is there somebody here who knows the difference between an app registration and an enterprise application in Entra ID management and knows it so well that they dare to explain the difference? Yes. Okay. I'm sadly not going to explain you exactly the difference, but there are situations where we want to add authentication to our functions. There are ways to do this in the function or whatever. I want to show you how to do this in the API management because it's using JWT validation, and this will work with any identity provider. We're going to use Entra ID, but any identity provider which uses JWT tokens, which is about everything, this would work with. So you could actually also make this work with something like a Google identity provider or Facebook identity provider because they also use JWT tokens. I believe some people call it JWTs or whatever. I just call it JWT. Sorry?
JWTs.
JWTs, yeah. I don't like that word. So for the people who don't know JWT, it's JSON Web Token. And it's the basis which most identity systems use nowadays. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new operation again called hello auth. We can see if it decided to work again already. Maybe I should just close this whole window and open it again, and this will make it work again. I need to quickly get the username again. I forgot what the username was. I believe it was blah blah or something. And we set up this password. At least it's not showing it this time. Okay. Let's see if we can create stuff again here. Yeah, great. Okay. So, oh no, not this one. Let's just ignore that one and let's create the next one. So we're going to create one called hello auth. And now it's starting to get interesting because we need to set up the authentication. And I can just use this piece of code. not add policy, edit the policy. And what we're doing here is we're using something called validate JWT. I will show it in VS Code because I think it's showing a bit better here. Validate JWT. We give it a header name, and the header name is the header where we can find the token. So in most cases, that would just be authorization. But it's the header where you will send along the token. We can give it the code which needs to be shown if the validation failed, the reason of the failing. We can say if the expiry time needs to be checked, which I would always recommend checking. The scheme, in our case, would be bearer. And we can check if the require signed tokens is true. I would also always suggest checking for signing, else you could just enter whatever. If you're using Azure AD or Entra ID, I need to say now, yeah, the problem was when I was looking this all up and the documentation, you still had to look for Azure AD because most of the documentation is written by other people who talk about this, and it's older things and it's not edited. And the Microsoft docs, they are more generalized and they don't have the examples specifically for Entra ID in there that much. So we can use this well-known configuration. And now we can say which things need to be checked in our token. In this case, I've said, let's check the audience and the issuer. And in a moment, we're going to check what this does. Now, what I did for you all is I created an app registration, which is called PowerUp APIM. I've created this very simply. I didn't set up anything. There is something set up here. This will be set up later. The initial setup is I create an app registration. I give it a name. And that's about it. And then I need to create a client secret because I want to log into this. So I'm going to give this a name, call it PSConfEU. I say it's going to expire in 90 days. It will expire in a couple of hours because then it will be deleted again because everybody is going to see this. I can copy this value. And we can start using this. So to test this, I'm going to have to log into Azure. And I'm going to need to use this application to create a token. So this one is a little bit harder for you to follow along. If you want to follow along, you need to kind of copy this key if you're using my environment. But you can create it and you can check. And the next one you can do yourself again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run this piece of PowerShell code, which calls an connect AZ account. And it's using the service principal, where we're entering the application ID and the application secret to log in via this application. So I'm going to run this code. Enter the secret. Now I'm logged in. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do get AZ access token. I'm going to get the token. Again, for people who are watching later, if you want to be funny, this is all deleted already, so this token is not used for you anymore. Now I'm going to do something you should never do. I'm going to go to a online service. I'm going to just paste the token in here so you can all see what it does, because this one is very nice to analyze the tokens. Please never use services like this with production tokens. They should be safe, but you just never know. There is also PowerShell scripts and so on available where you can also get this and do it on your own machine, and you can validate the code and whatever. But just to get an idea, your JWT token, it exists of 3 parts just being base64 decoded. And this information is in here base64 decoded or encoded. So here, for example, we can see the audience, the issuer, the issued ad, the app ID. So there's many different things in this token. And we can use these values in our validate JWT. So I think I forgot to click save when I was creating it. So let's paste this again. Here. And let's make the indenting a bit better. So at the moment, I'm only checking the audience and the issuer. While I was looking at it later again, I noticed that with just these 2 checks, it would accept a lot more than I bargained for. It would accept any token from my Entra ID because the app ID is actually not in here. The next example, it will be in there. So you will probably also want to add the app ID claim to this. But you can check for yourself which claims you want to add and which you don't want to add. This is just an example. We're going to validate this, and if it's correct, we're going to call the function, and if it's not correct, it should give a 401. So if we test this, and we say like name is Leo, it provides us with a 401. And now if we add a header called authorization, we say it's a bearer token. And we copy the value of this token. Fingers crossed. It's working. So we now added authentication. And this was actually quite easy, right? I just had to create an app registration and add this little piece of code. And it's just a copy paste from some documentation with 1 or 2 values changed. Like I had to change the tenant ID. For example, that this is my tenant ID. For example, I had to change this. So if you're following along later at home or in your own environment, you might need to change this tenant ID. It is also in the description. And with this piece of PowerShell code, we logged in, got our token, and it's working. So I believe I have like a couple of minutes left, so we can do the last one, and then we have a couple of minutes left for questions below, because I think it should stop at like 11:45. That's what the program said. So we're nice on time. Is everybody still okay? Yeah? Still doing good? Not too complex? Still following along? Good. Let's make it more complex. So, last one. My dream was to create this nice API, and based on my user account, I get different outputs. So I'm also often developing like different systems for example, I've written a score management system for Taekwondo competitions. Not because I'm doing Taekwondo, but because somebody dared me that I couldn't do it. This is how you get me to do stuff. Dare me not that I'm not able to do it. It's very bad for your time management. So I built this all also with API management and function apps. And I had this situation where I wanted to have API calls where if you're an admin, you can do this. If you're an admin, you get all the information of a user. And if you're a user, you just get some information, for example, or from a competitor. This is also useful in different situations where I can give users certain permissions by Entra ID, and it will affect the results they get back from my API. So Something which is quite hidden in Entra ID is app roles. It's just there, the blades, but I'm not sure. Before I started working with this kind of stuff, I never clicked this one. I was like, yeah, it's there, but what does it do? Because I can create a role here. I've created a role called user, and I created a role called admin. But if I click it, it says, yeah, you can assign users or applications. But where can I assign them? So, luckily, like a year ago or something, they added this link. Because everybody was always looking like, where can we actually add them? And it just says, well, here's the documentation and yeah, here's your enterprise application. So here we get to the part that we created an app registration, but also an enterprise application is created. And in this enterprise application, I have users. And I can add other users. So I could, for example, now look for all the users which have APIM in the name, which should be all of you following along here. I think, yeah, it does this. I can select them all, and I can now give you all the role of user. And now you're all added with the role of user. I could also have added you with the role of admin. I saw that there was some kind of one assignment failed. I think this is because it already had an assignment. So, by the way, who's here the Slim Shady? I just noticed this. You're now all added as a user to this application. We still manage the access to the application in a different way. But with this, now if I log in a specific way with this application, I actually get this claim of user added to me. So I can log into an application just using the app ID and the client secrets, but I can also have a user log in via an application. This is what we use if we're app developers. If I'm an app developer and I want to enable the Entra ID authentication, I create some kind of application in my Entra ID, and I make sure users log in via this application. Now, I'm not the best developer, but I am very good at ripping sample code from the internet. So I just created this small little website you can find in here. And this is using the MSOL library, I believe. MSOL is the new one, right? ADOL is the one being phased out. Yeah. So this is just using the MSOL JavaScript library. And it's using the most basic example I could find, where you don't need like a Node.js backend or whatever. It's a very simple one. The source code of this is actually in the repository. If you want to try this yourself, it's the index.html. This is the source code. It's changed a bit. You have to change the client ID here, and you have to change the tenant ID here. You can run it locally on like XAMPP or a local web server. Or what I did, I spun up a Azure app service, a free app service, and I just uploaded this to there. And what I need to do to make it work completely is I need to go to the redirect URIs, and I need to add the URL from where I'm logging in to the redirect URI. So if I would host this locally, it would just be like HTTPS localhost or HTTP localhost. Now, because I created the Azure website, I can just use the Azure website. You can actually also all use this. If you're using the URL in a browser where you're already logged in, you can just click here to log in. Accept. And now it's giving me back the username, and it also shows me the roles I have, because these roles, it extracts from the token, and it gives me here the token. We can also check this token if we want. And we'll see here that the roles are stored in the token. If I would change myself to admin, it would now be admin. I can also have admin and user both in there. It's an array. So I can have all of them. Going back to my API management. Different one. This is the one already set up. We can go and add a new operation. And we're going to call this one, it's somewhere in here, right? Yeah, hello role. It's not a critical role, it's just an hello role. I'm going to change the policy. And again, I've got here a policy snippet. Now, let's quickly look at it. We again have the validate JWT. It's a bit different this time. I now have the audience here and the issuer, the tenant ID is in here, and we're using V2. The token is set up a bit different because this is using a different version of OAuth. So the token is set up a bit different. So here we actually validate also for the app ID. So it would only work for this specific application. What also, I've added here the output token variable name. So what API management does is it takes the token and it stores it in a variable I can use. And here I'm checking if this variable has claims, and it checks if it has the claim roles and if this contains admin. And if it contains admin, we are setting the query parameter name to admin for our function. And if it contains user, we're setting it to user. If it has none, it now should bug out because I forgot to add a fallback option. And if the token is not valid, it should give a 401. So I should actually also add a claim here that it says if the claim roles doesn't exist, you should just give a 401. But this is only when I'm now talking about it again. Something with rubber duck debugging and so on. But we can add this. Hello role. Oh, yeah, other window. Thanks for spotting. I was like, this looks like it's already filled in. I think all the settings should be okay in here. And now I can test it. I don't have to give any parameter name because the name will be set differently anyways. I just have to add the authorization. It's again a bearer token. We can copy the token from here, the one we got. Edit, send it. And it says, hello user. And now if I would go to the Entra ID, I'm going to the enterprise applications. I'm going to the APIM, the Power Up APIM. To the users, I'm going to look for blah. Sorry, you shouldn't click there. And I'm going to edit the assignment, and I'm saying you're now an admin. So now it says admin. And we're going to call it again. Might take a little while. Oh, yeah, it's in the token. So I need to log in again. So we need to quickly log out and log in. Now I have a different token. I was actually doing this on purpose to see if anybody spotted it. And now it says hello admin. So I think API management is very useful for stuff like this. You see that we could actually quite easily add these features to stuff like an Azure function. It would work with Logic App, Azure Functions, all kinds of webhooks I can enable. So I can very easily add this layer and I don't have to manage this all in code. Because if you want to check these roles in your code, you also have to validate the whole JWT, make sure that it's all correct.
The developers hate.
Yeah, there are modules for this, but it's... Yeah. So we can do this. And you saw that it's not that hard to write a code. So we can allow our developers to write very easy functions. If I just have say to my developer, please write a script to restart a VM, I will make sure that the rest is managed. They're very happy with me. I can offload the security. I can reuse the policy fragments to make sure that it's easier to reuse stuff. I can manage variables and secrets with named values. I didn't show you, but the named values also has an option for like secrets. So they're stored encrypted and they're not shown. So you can use like secret values in there if you don't want to use a key vault. So personally, I think it's very, very useful. And I think we're almost out of time. So if there's any questions left, feel free to ask them now.
So the original URL of Azure function is still working now or not?
Yeah, at the moment, the original URL is still working because I'm using the cheap-ass versions. So I'm not allowed to connect them to a virtual network. So what I would do in a production environment is I would connect this API management to a virtual network and connect the Azure function to a virtual network and make sure that the backend call goes over my virtual network. And then I can disable the public endpoint for my Azure function.
Another question, is it possible to create any package with API policies to deploy to API management?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Is it possible to create a package including the fragments of policies
Yeah.
to push
Yeah.
API management?
So the question is if it's possible to make a package to include it all. If you're deploying an API management via Bicep or via infrastructure as code, you should be able to deploy these fragments and so on with it. They're just parts of the deployment. So you should be able to deploy these fragment and name values and so on. So if you're a platform engineer or whatever and you want to give your developers easy options, built-in parts, you can just add this in your deployment already. Are there any more questions?
In this example, you have the user and admin. I'm assuming you can expand that to how many you want.
Yes, I showed you that I created user and admin in the app registration. I can add whatever roles I want.
Can you add more to a user than one role?
Yes, it's an array, so you can have more than one. If you would need to check the logic a bit in your API management, because for now I just checked it with one and it would call the function. But you can also have API management call it for different things.
Looks like you had to add the user several times with different roles, right?
No, you can select more than one role.
You put in it was a drop down, right?
No. When I went here and I added the assignment,
Oh, you can select both. Okay. No, you can.
you should be able to select more than.
Select one. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But you can add one more with the same. With
Yeah, you can just add more
you need to add
in here.
Yeah.
Most of the times,
Would be nicer just to add a group and then I'll just add the users to the group. Then
yeah.
it will be-
So when we deployed the app registration and we created the app roles, here it says if I can only add users, groups, application, or both. So you can also add groups. So best way to do this would be to do it with groups and just manage it then with your Entra ID groups.
different roles and different levels of support.
Yeah,
Admins, blah. Then you can add everything to the same API and you can just scope.
indeed.
It's really nice.
Any more questions? Then thank you very much for being here, waking up this early and staying awake. I wish you a wonderful conference after this. And yeah, if you want to know more about this, the things are on the PSConf repo. So everything we did, the explanation is on there. So you can always do it again if you want. Recordings will be online. I'm available at socials. If you have questions, feel free to ping me on socials. I can always help you with it. And I've also a blog post where I also explain stuff about this on my website. Thank you very much.